Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I came home to an anniversary dinner I'd spent 2 days planning and found a cold, empty kitchen and a note sitting beside a half-finished cup on the counter. Jenna wrote that her friends had surprised her with a wine tour in Napa, and she needed me to be flexible because this could be important for her career. No call, no apology. Just a house that still smelled faintly like the candle she always bought at Target, burning down to nothing. My name is Mark Ellison, 38 years old, delivery driver for Walmart in Sacramento. I move pallets, unload trucks, and make sure shipments get where they're supposed to go. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and it's ours. At least, I thought it was. I stood there staring at the table I'd set. 2 plates, her favorite pasta, a bottle of red I'd picked up weeks earlier because she once said it tasted better than it should. I wasn't angry she went out with her friends. I was angry at the way her handwriting looked on that note. Casual, detached, like I was the one rearranging her plans, not the other way around. I didn't call her, didn't answer when she texted that she'd make it up to me next weekend. I just read the message once and then set my phone face down. Quiet is a language of its own, and she'd forgotten I spoke it fluently. The truth is, this wasn't sudden. Jenna had been drifting for months. Late nights, new dresses arriving every other week. Work events that looked more like parties for people who didn't know what a real shift felt like. She'd talk about clients who owned vineyards, restaurants, hotels. Entire worlds she wanted to orbit. Worlds that didn't include a man who smelled like cardboard dust and warehouse air. 2 days before our anniversary, her phone lit up while she was in the shower. A preview from someone named Derek, vineyard owner. His message wasn't subtle. If you're still thinking about the private tour, I can make time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. She walked out of the bathroom humming, wrapped in a towel, and kissed my cheek like we were still the same couple we'd been 5 years ago. I didn't say a thing. When she asked to reschedule our anniversary because this wine tour is a huge opportunity, I texted back one sentence. No need to reschedule what no longer exists. She didn't understand the meaning yet, but she would. While she posted smiling photos from the vineyard, sunlight, glasses raised, Derek's hand too familiar behind her back, I packed my things. Only mine. Documents I'd already moved to a separate account months earlier. Clothes, tools, the essentials. I signed a lease for a small studio I'd found on Craigslist. Cash deposit. Quiet arrangement. By sunset, the house wasn't ours anymore. It was hers alone. I placed my wedding ring on the counter beside her burnt-out candle, left the keys next to it, and locked the door behind me. When she returned from her tour, she walked into an empty home and a single message from me. Happy last anniversary. I didn't expect Jenna to call that night, but she did. Her voice on voicemail sounded confused at first, then irritated, asking why the lights were off, why my clothes were gone, why the house felt violated, as she put it. I didn't respond. Silence was the only answer she'd earned. I sat in my new studio, surrounded by half-open boxes and bare walls that smelled faintly of old paint, and listened to her messages roll in one after another. Confusion turned to panic, then anger, then back to panic. She kept saying she just needed to explain. I knew what explanations from her looked like. Overflowing detail where truth should be. Noise instead of substance. My Chevy Silverado sat under the street lamp outside, its paint catching the glare like it was waiting for instructions. After tonight, it was just the truck, stripped of every memory she'd ever attached to it. I watched traffic slide past the blinds and thought about how predictable everything had felt with Jenna, right until the last 6 months. The late nights. The rapid climb in her wardrobe expenses. The sudden fascination with boutique labels she'd never cared about before. The dresses meant for someone else's eyes, someone else's approval. The night before her tour, she'd been on her phone in the living room, speaking in a voice too polished to be natural. I caught fragments. Someone telling her they'd block the afternoon for her, and that private tastings attract the right people. When she hung up, she'd smiled at me with the same expression she used when she wanted to avoid questions. People don't always lie with words. Sometimes they lie with tone, with timing, with the way they set their phone face down on the table as if it were fragile. I spent the next morning in my studio, unpacking slowly, methodically. I set up my small desk, lined up my work boots in the corner, and stacked the handful of tools I'd brought along. It felt strange starting over, not because I doubted the choice, but because endings without noise feel unreal at first. I checked my phone around noon. 23 missed calls, 12 texts. Not one message asked if I was safe, or all right, or needed anything. Every one of them was about her confusion. Later, I drove to the river, parked the truck just off the gravel, and sat on the tailgate listening to wind dragging dust across the shallows. I walked through every red flag I'd ignored, every moment I'd chosen patience over confrontation. Quiet men see everything, and eventually, the quiet becomes a decision, not a habit. When I returned to the studio that evening, I finally sent her one message. No accusation, no emotion, nothing she could twist into her narrative. I'm not coming back. Jenna didn't respond right away. For about 6 hours, there was nothing but silence from her side, like she was trying to calculate the version of reality that made her look least at fault. When the messages finally came, they weren't about what she'd done. They were about what she believed I'd misunderstood. She wrote that the tour was strictly professional, that the vineyard owner treated all his partners generously, that I was misreading everything. I read each sentence once, then deleted it. I'd spent too long watching her build a life where honesty was a distant second to image. The studio felt smaller that night, the kind of small that sharpens the air. I made coffee using the cheap machine I'd picked up during a run to Walmart before my shift. The bitter smell cut through the heaviness, grounded me. I stood by the window and watched a couple walk down the sidewalk, laughing like their biggest problem was the wind kicking up dust. I wondered when Jenna and I had stopped sounding like that. Around midnight, another message came in. She wrote that her boss had heard rumors about her and Derek, and that she needed me to reassure her that she hadn't done anything wrong. The way she framed it was predictable, not an admission, a test, a plea for someone else to carry the responsibility. I didn't type anything back. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the photos she'd posted from the vineyard. 10 images in total. In every one, her smile was aimed slightly off camera, toward the man whose winery she'd been praising for months. She wasn't subtle anymore. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. Or maybe she thought I'd accept the downgrade. I remembered the first time she'd mentioned Derek. She'd come home with a bottle of his reserve vintage, talking about it like it was a passport to another life. She'd said the vineyard felt like a different world, one where people talked about ideas instead of schedules. I'd nodded, listening, letting her have the fantasy. I just didn't realize she'd start living in it. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I drove the truck through the quiet streets, letting the miles settle something inside me. I didn't go far, just enough to feel distance, enough to breathe. People think leaving is loud, shouting, slamming doors, broken plates. But that's not how real endings work. Real endings are quiet. A door closing, a lock turning, a man driving away with no intention of circling back. When I returned to the studio, I powered off my phone completely. Jenna could send 100 messages, type 1,000 excuses. None of them changed the truth. She'd already left our marriage long before I walked out of that house. And now, I was finally matching her silence with my own. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds in a thin, sharp line, the kind that doesn't warm anything. I woke up on a mattress still wrapped in its plastic, my jacket thrown over me like a blanket. For the first time in years, there was no sound of Jenna moving through the house, no clatter of heels on hardwood, no smell of her expensive perfume drifting down the hallway. Just silence. Clean, honest silence. I made coffee again, the same cheap stuff I'd grabbed at Walmart the night before everything blew open. I stood there holding the mug, staring at the blank wall across from me, letting the quiet settle. I didn't miss her. I missed the version of her that used to sit on the couch in sweatpants, drink burnt coffee with me, and laugh at the shows we swore we'd never admit to watching. That woman was gone long before I packed my belongings. Maybe long before either of us noticed. When I finally powered on my phone, the notifications nearly froze the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, paragraph-long texts. I scrolled through the previews without opening them. Jenna kept switching tones, as if she was testing each one to see which would pull me back. She wrote that people could misinterpret photos, that the vineyard owner was just being generous, that I was letting insecurity cloud my judgment. Not once did she say anything about loyalty. Around noon, I drove to the old house. Not to confront her, Not to reconsider. I just needed to confirm something I already suspected. I parked the truck 2 blocks away and walked slow, hands in my pockets, keeping to the shade. When I reached the house, I stood across the street, watching. Her car wasn't there, but the curtains in the living room were wide open, like someone had walked in and immediately needed light. A small sign that told me she wasn't grieving anything, just scrambling. I didn't linger. I walked back to the truck, turned the engine over, and headed toward the outskirts of town. I stopped by a gas station, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat in the parking lot with the engine idling. A man filling up beside me glanced over, probably wondering why someone looked like they were waiting for instructions from a life that had already moved on. I had no intention of explaining myself. Back at the studio, I opened my laptop and pulled up Jenna's public social media, something I'd rarely bothered checking before. She was still posting, still smiling. A photo from the wine tour I hadn't seen before, her standing beside Derek, his hand low on her back, her expression the kind people wear when they think they've finally stepped into the life they deserve. The caption talked about expanding professional horizons, but the body language said everything else. I closed the laptop. I didn't need more proof. The truth had been sitting in front of me for months, waiting for me to stop giving her the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't jealous of her new world. I was relieved to no longer be a prop in it. By the time evening settled in, the studio felt less like a place I'd escaped to and more like a place I'd earned. For walls, a thin mattress, a folding table, and my own quiet. No performance. No pretending. No walking on eggshells while Jenna chased validation from people who measured worth in vintages and exclusivity. I heated a simple dinner on the stove, something I hadn't done in a long time without her criticizing how basic it looked. She used to say we should elevate our meals. That was around the time her Amazon orders shifted from everyday essentials to high-end cookware she barely touched. When the phone finally rang instead of buzzing with texts, I recognized the number immediately. It was her sister, Emily. She rarely called, and when she did, it was usually because she'd heard something Jenna didn't want to admit. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice shook as she said Jenna was falling apart, that she'd come home to find everything gone, that she was panicking and insisting I'd misunderstood a professional engagement. Emily added that Jenna wanted to meet in person. She didn't ask what I wanted. I sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the message twice, letting the calm settle deeper. People always seem to forget that leaving quietly didn't mean leaving weak. Some men roar when they're hurt. I go still. Later that night, I drove through the neighborhood Jenna and I used to walk after dinner, back when life felt level. I didn't drive past the old house this time. There was no point. Whatever she was doing inside those walls no longer had anything to do with me. Instead, I parked near the small overlook outside town, a place we'd taken photos together years ago, before she traded simple sunsets for curated winery backdrops. For the first time since leaving, I let myself replay the last year without looking away. The late nights, the half-truths, the excitement in her voice whenever she mentioned Derek, as if he were an elevator and she just needed the right moment to step in. I'd given her room to grow, but she'd used that room to rewrite the rules. When I returned to the studio, I found a long message from Jenna waiting. She wrote that she couldn't sleep, that she felt lost, that someone at work had mentioned seeing her with Derek and she needed me to clear the air. She didn't mention loyalty, or honesty, or us, just fear for her reputation. I typed a response, then paused. I wasn't angry. I was done. I deleted what I wrote and sent something else instead, something cleaner, quieter, impossible to debate. You chose your world. I chose mine. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, the studio still dim and quiet, the air cold enough to make me pull on a sweatshirt. I made coffee and stepped outside, leaning against the railing while the world was still half asleep. For the first time in a long while, my head didn't feel cluttered. Leaving wasn't chaos. It was clarity. My phone buzzed again. Not Jenna this time. Her boss. The message was short, formal, and careful. He wrote that Jenna hadn't shown up for a meeting, that she'd seemed emotionally distressed, and that he wanted to understand the situation. That last part made me shake my head. People in her world were always more worried about narratives than consequences. I didn't reply. It wasn't my job to manage the image she'd fractured. Around mid-morning, I drove to the store for a few basics, some groceries, a cheap lamp, and a set of dishes that didn't look borrowed from a motel. I walked through Target without rushing, picking things she would have called uninspired. Plain plates, neutral colors, the kind of items meant to be used, not shown off. As I loaded the bags into the truck, I realized how light it felt moving through a world without her criticism trailing behind me. Back at the studio, I unpacked everything slowly. Each object felt like a small anchor in a life I actually recognized. While I worked, my phone lit up again. Emily. She said Jenna hadn't slept, that she kept pacing, crying, insisting I'd thrown away everything without explanation. Then Emily said something that made me pause. She said Jenna admitted she might have let things go too far with Derek because she felt seen in a way she didn't at home. She didn't say she regretted it. She didn't say she'd been wrong. Just that she felt seen. People reveal themselves most clearly when they're cornered. I set the phone down and assembled the small table I'd bought, tightening each screw with a calm I hadn't felt in months. I knew Jenna wanted to meet face to face. Not for closure. For control. She needed to steer the story, reshape it, convince herself she wasn't the problem. Late afternoon sunlight filled the studio when her final message came in. She said she would come to the studio if I didn't respond, that we needed to talk like adults, and that I owed her that much. I read it twice, then locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. I didn't owe her a performance. I owed myself distance. Jenna didn't show up at the studio that evening, but I knew it was only a matter of time. When she couldn't control a situation, she hovered around it until she found a way in. I spent the night cleaning the place, not because she might come by, but because the order helped me think. In the old house, she used to reorganize everything the second I set it down. She'd say the living room needed to feel elevated, or that the kitchen had to match the aesthetic of someone moving up. It never felt like a home. It felt like a showroom for the life she wanted people to think she lived. The next morning, I grabbed a breakfast sandwich and coffee from a nearby McDonald's, eating in the truck while the engine warmed. I hadn't realized how much I missed simple things. No curated plates, no imported ingredients, no pressure to pretend a $10 bottle was embarrassing. Just food, hot and straightforward. I drove to the river again and parked under the same tree as before. The water moved slowly, steady, unbothered by anything happening above it. That's what I wanted. Steady, unbothered. When I finally turned my phone back on, I saw a message from an unknown number. It wasn't Jenna. It was Derek. I stared at the preview before opening it. He wrote that Jenna had misled him, that he had no intention of causing problems, and that he hoped I could see the situation clearly. The wording told me everything. He wasn't apologizing. He was protecting his business, protecting his name. In his world, reputation was currency, and he wasn't about to let mine interfere with his. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, a message from Jenna came through. She wrote that she found out I'd spoken to no one. Not her, not her sister, not her boss, and that my silence was unfair. She said she was hurting, that she didn't deserve to be abandoned without a conversation, and that if I didn't meet her today, she'd come to my workplace. That last part told me she still didn't understand who I was anymore. She thought showing up at Walmart, creating a scene in front of my coworkers, would force me to engage. She thought chaos would shake me loose. She didn't understand silence. She didn't understand that I'd built an entire exit without raising my voice once. I drove back toward town, not toward her, but toward a life that didn't orbit her moods. Each mile I put between us felt like a drawer closing, a chapter sealing. When I reached the studio, I locked the door, turned my phone off again, and sat down at the small table I'd assembled. I knew Jenna would try one more time before she realized the truth. Some relationships end with a fight. Ours ended with a locked door and a man who refused to be pulled back into a world he'd outgrown. By Saturday morning, the air felt heavier, like the quiet had a pulse of its own. I woke up before my alarm, sat on the edge of the mattress, and let the cold floor steady me. I knew Jenna wouldn't stay passive. Her silence never lasted long. She needed movement, reaction, someone to bounce her version of events off of. Without that, she spiraled. I made a small breakfast, the kind she used to roll her eyes at. Eggs, toast, nothing curated, nothing plated like a magazine spread. I ate standing up, looking out the narrow window at a street barely awake. A couple walked their dog. A teenager biked past. Everything looked normal, almost boring. I realized how much I wanted boring. Quiet. Predictable. Things Jenna used to say she appreciated until she found a world that promised her more. Around 9, I turned my phone on. It lit up with the fury of someone who'd run out of strategies. Jenna had sent messages throughout the night, each one more frantic than the last. She wrote that she'd spoken to her boss, that she'd insisted nothing inappropriate happened with Derek, that she needed me to say something before things got worse. She still didn't mention the marriage, just the fallout. Her last message was the one that mattered. She wrote that she was coming to see me. No time, no question, just an announcement. I read it twice, then set the phone down. 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the metal stairs outside. Slow, uncertain, not the confident pace she used to have when she walked into a room. The sound stopped right outside my door. A soft knock followed, barely there. She said my name in a voice I barely recognized. Small, controlled, practiced. She said she just wanted to talk, that she didn't mean for any of this to happen, that she needed me to open the door so she could clear the misunderstanding. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I leaned back in the chair and listened to her breathing on the other side of the wood. For years, she'd filled our home with noise, opinions, instructions, corrections, until silence was the only thing I craved. Now she was facing it for the first time. She knocked again, harder this time. She said she knew I was inside, that this wasn't fair, that I couldn't just walk away without closure. Her voice cracked on that word. Closure. As if that were something she got to request after everything she'd stepped into willingly. I let her talk. Let her fill the hallway with explanations shaped more like performances than confessions. She listed reasons. Defenses. Accusations softened to sound reasonable. She kept saying she felt pushed away, that she'd only turned to Derek because she needed someone who understood her ambition. I stayed still. My silence was a mirror she wasn't prepared to look into. Eventually, her voice thinned. The knocking stopped. I heard her steps retreat slowly down the stairs, each one heavier than the last. When the final echo faded, I exhaled. Quiet wasn't just my weapon. It was my boundary, my decision, the line she couldn't cross anymore. The door stayed closed, and so did that chapter of my life. I didn't open the door that day, or the day after. The studio stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not forced. I spent Sunday cleaning again, not because it needed it, but because the rhythm of it settled my thoughts. Every corner I scrubbed felt like a piece of my old life being wiped away. Around noon, I sat on the floor with a sandwich and turned on Hulu in the background, letting some mindless show play while I sorted through papers. It felt strange how peaceful the room felt with just my breathing, the clinking of dishes, the low hum of the screen. No tension, no performance, no pretending. By the afternoon, a message popped up from Emily. She said Jenna hadn't come out of her room since yesterday, that she looked broken, that she was scared of losing everything. Her job, her image, her standing with the wine distributors. Emily asked me to please reconsider talking to her. I didn't answer. My silence wasn't revenge. It was closure. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. It was Derek. Not a long message. Men like him rarely wasted words when their reputation was at stake. He wrote that Jenna was distressed, that he didn't want misunderstandings harming her professional trajectory, and that he hoped I could move forward without unnecessary conflict. The wording was polished, rehearsed. Derek wasn't worried about me. He was worried about how this could look if it spread through the industry. I deleted the message. Near sunset, I drove out to the overlook again, parking the truck where the gravel met the grass. The sky was fading from orange to gray, and the valley below looked washed in shadows. I sat on the tailgate, letting the wind cut through my sweatshirt. It felt clean, honest. I thought about everything Jenna had said through the door, all the excuses she'd thrown like ropes meant to pull me back into her orbit. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught in a moment where my silence mattered more than her narrative. When I got back to the studio, a final message from Jenna waited. Not frantic, not angry, just cold. She wrote that she understood now, that I wanted nothing to do with her, that she would respect my decision moving forward. But the last line showed the truth. She wrote that she hoped I realized I ruined something we could have salvaged. I set the phone down slowly. People like Jenna never see the moment they break something. They only see the moment someone stops fixing it for them. That realization, more than anything she'd said, told me I'd made the right choice the night I walked out and didn't look back. Monday morning came quiet and steady, the kind of morning that doesn't demand anything from you. I woke up before my alarm, brewed a small pot of coffee, and sat by the window while the street slowly came alive. A few cars passed. Someone walked their dog. A delivery truck rumbled somewhere in the distance. Normal life. Ordinary life. The kind Jenna used to say she respected, right up until she convinced herself she deserved something shinier. I checked my phone only once. No new messages from her. No calls. The silence wasn't surprising. Once people like Jenna realize their words can't rearrange reality, they fall back into whatever world still applauds them. Her last message, the one blaming me for ruining something salvageable, was the closest she'd ever come to admitting she'd chosen status over loyalty. She just couldn't say it plainly. Fiction was her comfort zone. I spent the morning doing laundry at the small coin-op a block away. The hum of machines and the smell of detergent felt grounding. A man next to me folded shirts while watching something on his iPhone, nodding along like he was in his own world. Nobody there knew my story. Nobody knew what I'd walked away from. For the first time in months, the anonymity felt good. Back at the studio, I sorted through the last of my boxes. Old photos, receipts, documents from a life that didn't fit anymore. I found a picture of Jenna and me from years back, one taken before her job shifted her priorities, before she started chasing rooms where people measured each other by wealth instead of character. We looked young, solid. I slid the photo into an envelope and tucked it into a drawer. Not to keep the memory alive, just to put it somewhere it couldn't distract me. That afternoon, I took the truck out to the overlook one last time. The wind was calmer, the sky clear. I watched the valley below, thinking about everything that had happened since the moment I'd read her note on our anniversary. How fast a life could fracture. How quietly it could be rebuilt. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. Just a clean, steady certainty that walking away had been the first honest decision I'd made in a long time. Before I left, I sent Jenna one final message. Not cruel, not emotional, just true. Take care. Then I powered off my phone, climbed into the truck, and let the engine settle into its low, familiar rumble. The road ahead wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, mine. Some men fight back with noise. I chose silence. And in the end, silence was what set me free. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.